Hello, fellow listeners. This is Thea from the tiny, beautiful, and extremely safe town of Harbor Springs, Michigan. You are listening to the California Dreaming podcast with the amazing host Roseanne on the Orbital JIGSAW network. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review after this awesome episode.
California Dreaming is brought to you by BLUBRRY. You know, there is a little bit more to making a podcast than just talking into a mic and hitting publish. You need more than that. And I'm talking about a reliable hosting service so your time can be spent working on your show. You also want accurate download numbers, you want to see the audience that you're reaching, and you're going to want a webpage that is simple and easy to work with. That's why I choose BLUBRRY. With its simple media hosting and fully integrated WordPress website, it can't get any easier. So if you host a show or if you're thinking about starting one, visit www.orbitaljigsaw.com/dream to give BLUBRRY a try for a month for free. BLUBRRY's support team will be right there every step of the way to help you migrate over so you won't lose any of your subscribers in the process. And if you're brand new to this, they can get your new show up and running. And with a month for free to try it out using promo code DREAM, what have you got to lose? There are a number of ways that you can support California Dreaming. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can spread the word about the show, you can recommend us in podcast and true crime fan groups, and you can leave the show a rating or a review on iTunes or whichever platform you listen to the show on. And if you would like to go a little above and beyond, you can also support the show on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can gain access to one exclusive episode per month, and there are currently more than 30 episodes that you can binge, so it's a pretty good deal for just $1. I'm going to save Patreon shoutouts for the next episode, but I do want to thank you. I know who you are, and I'll get back at you next week. And if you're not interested in a monthly donation, you can help with a one-time donation to the show through our PayPal using our email, californiapod@gmail.com. Every little bit helps, keeps us going, and ad-free, so thank you. For a long time, there used to be this belief that when a murder is committed, if there is no body, there would be no conviction. The idea behind that was that it would be next to impossible to prove that the person who had gone missing didn't just up and leave to start a new life or to begin a new relationship, or just wanted to be someplace else in the world and off the grid. And in the past, investigators would have to just accept that unless evidence was uncovered or if the body eventually surfaced. Some victims are never found, but some turn up after some time passes, at which point the prime suspect can be taken into custody. Sometimes the suspect himself inadvertently leads investigators right to the body, hoping that he or she will return to the place where the body was hidden. I saw this happen recently on an episode of Forensic Files, and I know I'm talking about that show a lot, but I've been binging a lot at night. Anyway, this husband, he reported his wife missing, and it was in Florida, the Florida Keys. He had driven to Key West, and he said that he had gone with his wife, and I think he said that she went for a walk or something and never came back. And when he went down to the beach, all he found were her flip-flops. But as law enforcement started investigating him, they found that as he made his way through the Florida Keys, he had stopped for gas and went into a convenience store, but he was alone. When he arrived at his hotel, he ordered only one dinner to go. And when surveillance footage of him was pulled passing through the toll gates, there was nobody in the passenger seat with him. So it was pretty clear that he went to Key West alone. But they had no idea where his wife was or what he did with her. So investigators put a GPS on his car. He had been carrying on at least one, possibly more extramarital affairs. And he actually took one of his dates to this state park for a picnic. And when authorities went out there with search dogs, they quickly found a recently disturbed patch of dirt. And sure enough, his wife was wrapped in trash bags and duct tape and left in a shallow grave. They think that he took his date there so that he could check on the grave and make sure that it hadn't been disturbed. But they really had no other evidence to go on until then. And it was kind of the same thing with Laci Peterson. If she had not washed ashore the April after she went missing, who knows if her killer would have ever been convicted, as there was essentially no other evidence that foul play had taken place. And they were keeping an eye on her killer too, so as the news broke that she and Connor had washed ashore, he was fixing to go on the run with that ugly dyed orange hair and his brother's ID and money and passport and whatever else he had with him. And then back in episode 99, The Tale of the Grifters, those were the words that Sante Kimes lived by. No body, no crime. And that may have worked for most of her life, but once she hit the turn of the millennium, her mantra wasn't going to continue to hold up. But there have been convictions without bodies. The first one here in the United States dating back more than 160 years to 1958, when the wife and infant daughter of Edward Roloff disappeared on June 23, 1844. It was believed that he murdered the both of them, but he was only put on trial for kidnapping his wife, for which he was convicted and sentenced to 10 years. He was released in 1856, but subsequently was tried and convicted of murdering his daughter. But then he ended up escaping from prison, and eventually his conviction was overturned on appeal in 1859. 11 years later, in 1870, Roloff was hanged for another murder unrelated to his wife and baby. Thus far, the states who have had no body convictions include New York, Arkansas, California, Florida, Oregon, New Jersey, Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania, Maryland, Connecticut, Utah, Arizona, Texas, Washington, Tennessee, Minnesota, New Mexico, Michigan, and technically Wisconsin is on the list with the conviction of Jeffrey Dahmer, but his missing bodies may have been scattered in other states, since Wisconsin is surrounded by several other states that really aren't all that far away, including Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Minnesota, Michigan. And I mean, they're not all that close, but that's a lot of neighboring states, not to mention Canada's up there too. Anyway, California is in the lead with 7 no-body convictions, followed closely by the state of New York with 6. The first one I talked about a moment ago, Edward Roloff, that is a case out of New York. Matter of fact, his wife and daughter went missing 6 years before California even became a state. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we in the Facebook group welcomed the founder of the Charlie Project, Megan Good. And as it stands, on her website, there are more than 13,000 missing persons listed, which she launched in October of 2004. Many of you are familiar with the charlieproject.org, but if you're not, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it. According to the site, the Charlie Project was named after Charles Brewster Ross, who was abducted from his hometown in Germantown, Pennsylvania on July 1st, 1874, when he was 4 years old. His family spent the rest of their lives searching for him, and they pretty much searched the world, and his story did garner international attention. Of course, he was not the first kidnapping in the United States, but it was the first that was so highly publicized. Charlie was never found. Whatever became of him was never uncovered. He may have died soon after he vanished, or he may have lived never knowing his true identity or that he was ever kidnapped. So Megan named her site in his memory so that he and the other 13,636 people who are currently listed won't be forgotten. The Charlie Project serves as a publicity vehicle and clearinghouse of information for missing persons. It attempts to catalog as much information as possible about as many cases as possible in a database as a publicity and investigative aid for the public and law enforcement to help solve cases. A wide variety of sources are used, such as other databases, news media accounts, law enforcement, information supplied by friends and family members of the missing, and books. All of the information is then summarized on each missing person's Charlie Project case file. In this way, instead of having to track down, say, 20 different news articles from 5 different sources about a missing person, any interested party can simply go to the Charlie Project and find it all in one place. The Charlie Project is free for all visitors all the time, but if you would like to help, there is a donation button if you could spare $1 or $2 to help keep the lights on. Because I'm sure managing a site with that many missing people isn't easy, and I know I couldn't do it. So within a few days of joining us, Megan messaged me about a missing person from California. She told me that she thought it was the very first case in the state to be prosecuted without a body. And it's from a long time ago. And I don't always do cases that are, 1, unsolved, and 2, have been from many, many decades ago, because sadly, there isn't always a lot of information to go on. You know how I like to chat ad nauseum about some of these stories, but there might just be enough here that I could at least put together a bonus episode. That's what I'm thinking. I don't think this is going to be more than an hour. That's pretty much how I decide if I'm going to label an episode a bonus or a regular numbered episode. If it's under an hour, I'll make it a bonus. If it's longer, I'll just number it. This is a case that will take us back to 1945, just after the official end of World War II, when the Japanese signed off on their surrender papers. On this episode of California Dreaming, recommended to us by Megan Good, we discuss the disappearance of Thora Chamberlain. The backdrop of our story is the Silicon Valley city of Campbell, California, located in Santa Clara County, slightly southwest of San Jose, in the southern part of the San Francisco Bay Area. Though of course back then in 1945, this wasn't quite yet the Silicon Valley. However, the world was changing, as I mentioned earlier. We were at a time following the August 1945 atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, effectively ending World War II, leading to the official surrender on September 2, 1945, and thus launching the United States into a prosperous, decades-long economic boom. 2 months to the day that Japan signed those papers on the deck of the USS Missouri, on November 2, 1945, Thora Chamberlain, described in an article in the Mercury News as a very sweet and devoutly religious girl. She was a 14-year-old student at Campbell High School, only 20 days away from her 15th birthday. On that afternoon, she and some of her friends were walking down Winchester Boulevard, headed to a football game between her school and Washington High School of Centerville, now known as Fremont High. It was a Friday, almost 3 o'clock in the afternoon. A man pulled up, driving a blue Plymouth. Thora's friends said that he was dressed as if he had been in the service, based on his look and the way he was dressed. And as I said, this is on the heels of the end of the war. So yes, the servicemen and women were coming back home. But this guy really actually wasn't ever in the military. But considering the time, it's easy to see why these young people believed him. The friends described him as wearing gray navy trousers and a navy-style white t-shirt with the blue insignia that read Londonderry, Ireland. He also had a purple Service Heart medal pinned to his shirt, as well as a garrison hat, which is also called a side cap or a wedge cap in Canada. It's one of those ones that folds flat when you're not wearing it. Over the cap, it was covered to protect it from the rain. According to witnesses, there was nobody else inside the car when Thora was talking to this man. So this man had called out to her and told her that he was in the service and he had been trying for some time to find a babysitter for his nieces and nephews for about a half hour. He had already approached another one of Thora's friends, but she was unwilling to help the stranger because she was anxious to get to the football game. Thora decided to go ahead and help the man with his childcare needs. It was only a half hour. She'd be back in plenty of time for the game. As she got into his car, she told her friends to save her a seat, that she'd be back in a little bit. Thora never returned, and she was never seen or heard from again. At the time that Thora was last seen, she was wearing clothes that were of her school colors, specifically for the football game. She was wearing a red skirt, a blue sweater, 2 pairs of socks, a pair of red socks and a pair of blue socks with one on each foot. With her, she had her books and a binder and a cowbell. Later that evening, when Thora failed to return home, her family reported her missing to police, and they subsequently enlisted the help of the FBI. It didn't take very long for a suspect to come into focus based on the information provided by witnesses. There was a man who lived in the city of San Mateo. His name was Thomas Henry McMonigal. He had a pretty lengthy arrest record dating back to when he was a teenager. At the time, witnesses described him being about 32 years old. His criminal record included arrests for assault and attempted rape. And like I said, he had never been in the military, so all that was a ruse in order to gain the trust of an unsuspecting young girl. He's a serviceman, right? He served the country in a war that we had just resoundingly won. The man's got a Purple Heart on. This guy's a hero, right? No harm in babysitting for 30 minutes or so. Today, there is not a chance in the world our teenage girls are going to get into a car like this. And I don't even know if these types of predators are even that brazen anymore either. It's so hard to get away with anything like that these days. But those were different times, and people were more trusting. People were especially trusting of those who were in authority. He did later confirm that he was never in the military, and I'll come back to where he got the clothes in a moment. I did find a few more details about McMonigal in the court documents related to this case. At the time of Thora's disappearance, he was working as a laborer at a construction yard in Burlingame, California. He reported to work the morning of Saturday, November 3rd, 1945, the day following Thora having gone missing, though he had failed to show up for work the previous Monday through Friday, that week ending on the 2nd of November. He continued to work until November 8th, at which point he realized he had been identified as the last person to see Thora and was being sought by authorities, so he decided to flee. He told his wife that he was taking a bus to Los Angeles, but what he was actually going to do was hitchhike from California to his father's home in Cottage Hills, Illinois. The FBI was tracking McMonigal's movements as he made his way across the Midwest, following the trail that he was leaving from the various hotels along the way. And as he was making his way back to California by way of bus, he overdosed on sleeping pills, and he was taken to the hospital on December 6, 1945, and then he was arrested 2 days later on the 8th, with doctors giving him a clean bill of health, telling the FBI that everything about him physically and neurologically was normal, that he was rational, mentally clear, and well-oriented. McMonigal was held in FBI custody until December 17th, at which time he was released to the Santa Clara County Sheriff and subsequently transferred to the custody of the Santa Cruz County authorities. As the FBI had been tracking him across the Midwest, he was using aliases and staying at various hotels and motels. And they did discover at one of the hotels that he had been at sometime towards the end of November, he either forgot or deliberately left behind an entire set of luggage, which the hotel manager identified as belonging to the fugitive and inside one of those bags was a .32 caliber Colt revolver. After he was taken back into custody, witnesses at the scene confirmed that McMonagle was the man who they saw Thora talking to about babysitting the afternoon that she went missing. Once McMonagle got to talking, he admitted that he never served in the Navy or in any branch of the military for that matter. He obtained the clothing and other items witnesses identified seeing him wearing by stealing a footlocker from an actual serviceman, and that footlocker contained all of the official Navy-issued clothing, including the garrison hat, the gray trousers, the t-shirt, the medals. Investigators later found that footlocker hidden in his garage at his home in San Mateo. When it came to what happened to Thora, McMonagle offered a variety of stories and explanations as to what happened that day. I'll get into more details when we get to the trial, but he first said that he shot her. He also said he stabbed her, he strangled her, he shot her accidentally, she died falling out of his car, and he also denied having anything to do with her death at all. When McMonagle's vehicle was searched, investigators discovered a bullet hole on the inside of the door panel, which led them to believe that the story that he shot Thora as she was seated inside the vehicle was the truth. McMonagle did say that he removed the bullet from the door and buried it near a tree in his backyard. He also said that he removed all of the padding and upholstery because it was saturated with blood. And those items he buried in a drainage ditch near his work site at the construction yard. Investigators searched for those items that he described that he had buried and were able to recover both the bloody upholstery as well as the bullet, which was later determined to be a ballistical match to the .32 Colt revolver that was recovered from the luggage that he left behind at that hotel. McMonagle also admitted to investigators that after he shot Thora, he drove her to a place known as the Devil's Slide. It's a cliff overlooking Half Moon Bay along the San Mateo County coast. I'll get into more details about that evidence as we get to the trial and court documents, as he would be facing trial for Thora's murder. The prosecution believed that McMonagle kidnapped Thora with the intentions of sexually assaulting her, but they believe that she put up a fight, at which time McMonagle shot her while she was seated in his car. Whether or not the sexual assault took place is anybody's guess. McMonagle himself has given so many conflicting stories, and he's never really said, nor did he ever admit to anything other than kidnapping and killing Thora. At the trial, the FBI testified in great detail about the manner in which McMonagle was reconstructing the events of the day that he picked up Thora Chamberlain, as well as all of the time and resources they spent on search expeditions with the hopes of recovering her body. They had driven McMonagle all over countless roads across 3 counties, and he kept promising that he wanted to help them. They retraced all the routes that McMonagle claimed to have taken that day with Thora. He said they drove from Campbell to Los Gatos to Santa Cruz by way of Highway 17. Then they drove along Coast Highway 1 to a point about 0.3 of a mile south of the San Mateo County line in Santa Cruz County. He first told investigators that he shot Thora as she sat in the front seat. In that statement he said, "If I shot her, that is where it took place. Whatever happened to the girl, to her at this point, there was but one shot fired. I do not recall. Replacing the bullet which was discharged from and on the occasion, the gun was fired on Highway 1 at the time the situation happened to the girl. I am satisfied that the girl was dead at the time I proceeded north. While I'm not certain as to what happened with the gun in the front seat of the car, I know it is my responsibility for what occurred at this time." McMonagle also claimed that he proceeded north along the coast route to a place about 10 miles north of Half Moon Bay on Highway 1, which is known as Devil's Slide. This is where he dropped her body off the side of a 300-foot or 91-meter cliff down into the ocean. The FBI conducted an intensive search of the area and terrain near the Devil's Slide, much of it focused on the bottom, the ocean, and the base of the cliff. A pair of red and a pair of blue socks were found, which were nestled in the rocks about 2/3 of the way down the face of the cliff. These socks were shown to Thora's parents, who confirmed that they belonged to her. Despite the extensive search, no trace of Thora herself was ever found. A search was also conducted at the construction yard where McMonagle was working at the time surrounding Thora's disappearance. As they dug near a causeway at the site, they uncovered some gray trousers, like the ones McMonagle had been described wearing when he was speaking to Thora. When he was shown this article of clothing, McMonagle admitted that they were indeed the ones that he had on that day. He said when he returned home, they were covered in blood, so he washed them. And he was afraid that he would not have been able to get rid of all the traces of blood, that he thought there might be blood lodged into the seams or into the pockets. So he wrapped them up and took them to the construction yard. And the first chance he had, he buried them while nobody else was around. Some of the people who worked with McMonagle reported that when he showed up for work on November 3rd, he was bragging that he had been on a date with a 15-year-old girl the prior evening. His employer said that on November 6th, McMonagle was given instructions to build a small ramp, or the causeway that I had just mentioned, on the property adjacent to the yard by filling it in with concrete blocks and dirt. He reported that McMonagle worked alone on the project that day. When the causeway was excavated based on McMonagle's directions, after he admitted to burying the trousers, the FBI subsequently dug up various items that were also later identified to belong to Thora. Her shoes, her school books, some papers, a binder, and her cowbell. McMonagle had previously wasted a bunch of the investigators' time by telling them that Thora's items were buried in his backyard, but extensive digs turned up nothing. Following his arrest, McMonagle in his statements to law enforcement referenced his .32 Colt revolver. It had been recovered by the FBI from the luggage that he left behind in a hotel in Quincy, Illinois. The hotel manager confirmed that McMonagle stayed there in the latter part of November 1945 while he was on the run. In his statement, McMonagle said that the gun discharged, killing Thora, and the bullet became embedded in the wood frame of the doorpost between the right front door and rear doors of the car. He said he dug the bullet out after the killing and later buried it under a tree in his backyard. That bullet was recovered by the FBI and entered into evidence along with the actual wooden door frame of the car. They also had in evidence the padding and upholstery McMonagle had removed from the vehicle because it was stained with blood, as he had described Thora as having blood gushing from her mouth. The blood-stained items, the bullet, and the gun were sent to the FBI labs in Washington, D.C. Their testing concluded that there was the presence of human blood on the upholstery and the bullet was a match to the gun. I mentioned that the statements McMonagle had given to the FBI when he was questioned on December 12, 1945 had varied a lot, with different versions of how Thora was killed. Not only did he give various stories about how he killed her, he also gave various locations as to where it all took place. When he gave a statement to the San Mateo County Sheriff on January 3, 1946, he told them he choked Thora to death to a point on the beach slightly north of Half Moon Bay, and then threw her lifeless body over the side of a cliff at a location about a half-mile from where her socks were found. On the next day, January 4th, McMonagle, claiming to want to give a more accurate and detailed account of what happened than the previous day, signed off on another statement he gave to the Santa Cruz District Attorney. This time he claimed that he either stabbed the girl with his hunting knife or choked her to a point about 10 miles north of Half Moon Bay, and that he threw the body over the cliff in the vicinity of the Devil's Slide. Then on January 19th, McMonagle gave yet another statement to the FBI where he claimed he had picked up the girl for purposes of delivering her into the hands of a white slave ring in San Francisco. But when they stopped the car at that place along the ocean south of Half Moon Bay, He gave her ether and she went off to sleep. Ether is the predecessor to chloroform, developed as a surgical anesthesia in the 1800s. It's colorless, but it kind of smells good, though it's highly flammable. Chloroform was eventually developed, which worked faster and was not flammable. Then McMonagle said he drove to a place on the other side of Half Moon Bay on Highway 1 where he said he choked Thora. He took off her clothing and left her body near the road for the night. He claimed he returned the next day and took her body to a field adjacent to the construction yard where he worked, placed her in a drainage ditch, and covered her with some dirt and refuse, which he hauled in using a dump truck. He had access to all that stuff because he worked there. Following this January 19th statement, the FBI returned to the construction yard and conducted another extensive search, but Thora's body was still not recovered. And then McMonagle reverted back to his original story that he threw her body over the cliff at Devil's Slide and insisted if they looked closely at the rocks around there, they would soon be able to find some blood or hair because that's where he put her. But they searched again and found nothing. Every statement McMonagle gave, he gave on his own, according to him, to try and clear this case up so that Thora's body may be found for the benefit of her parents. The FBI agents traveled more than 1,000 miles or 1,600 kilometers across San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz counties, and they often brought McMonagle with them as he continually took them on these wild goose chases with all of the confusing leads that he had. But then when McMonagle took the stand in his own defense, he actually gave an entirely different account of what happened to Thora. He said that while he was driving in Campbell on November 2nd, he got lost. He saw Thora walking along the sidewalk and stopped to ask her for directions to San Jose. He said she willingly got in the car to show him the road and how to get there. She then told him she wanted to go back to school for the game. McMonagle said he began driving very fast along a country road about 1.5 miles west of Campbell, at which time Thora became frightened and jumped out of the car and injured herself. He placed her back in the car and started heading back towards Campbell to take her to the hospital. But after she was in the car for about 5 minutes, she died as a result of her injuries that she sustained jumping from the moving vehicle. He went back to the area near where she had fallen out of the car and buried her under some leaves along the side of the road. At the trial, McMonagle claimed that this version he provided was the truth, and in explanation of its inconsistency with the accounts given in his previous statements, he asserted that he deliberately would not tell the truth because of the attitude of the district attorney and others working to prosecute him in Santa Cruz County. He attempted to explain the bullet hole in the doorpost of his car by saying that it was caused by the accidental discharge of his gun several months earlier. When he was asked how he could explain why Thora's socks were found on Devil's Slide on Highway 1, he said, quote, "There was only 2 ways I figured those socks came to that point. They were either placed there at the point, or else the statement that they were found there is untrue." So next he was asked, "Do you want to go out there as a part of these court proceedings and show us the body of Thora Chamberlain to corroborate your testimony that you buried her along the roadside near Campbell after she died as a result of her injuries from jumping from your car?" He said yes, that he would like to have such an opportunity. So arrangements were made for the following morning, but when the court convened at that time as scheduled, McMonagle declined to go upon advising the court, without the jury present, that a prisoner in the county jail the night before informed him that making such a trip would expose him to mob violence and that he would not be protected from them. They continued to discuss the matter, but McMonagle continued to refuse to take the trip. So the jury was brought back in and the proceedings continued. This prosecution took a risk taking McMonagle to trial for murder without a body. There had only been 3 successful no-body convictions in the United States at the time that he was being tried, and this would be the first one in the state of California. We can never know exactly what happened to Thora or which one of McMonagle's stories is true. But I do believe that there are some shades of truth in most of his statements. I just think he wanted to be out and about and riding around on the California coast, revisiting the crime that he committed against Thora. So he was making up all these different crime scenes and these different burial places just to send everyone out on a wild goose chase, and he would get to go with them. I don't know if McMonagall stabbed Thora or if he shot her. I think both could be true. But I also think he stopped at various places to choke her and either sexually assault her or attempt to sexually assault her. He could have been making all these promises that he was going to let her go home so that he could prolong this ordeal and maintain her cooperation. I think there probably was a point where Thora decided she'd had enough and jumped out of the moving vehicle, and when he stopped to bring her back in the car, from there she had just sustained injuries that only weakened her even further, making it difficult, if not impossible, to put up any more of a struggle against McMonagall. There may have been times throughout this period of time that he was making all of these various statements that he recanted his entire story, denying having anything to do with her death. But if he stuck to that, then his field trips with the FBI and the sheriffs would stop. So he'd fess up to the killing again with a new story. And I believe it is most likely that he tossed her over the cliff, which is why she was never found, because she likely got washed out to sea. They managed to find everything else that McMonagall buried: her clothes, her notebook, her papers, her cowbell, even a bullet. They found it. If he had buried her body at any of the locations he brought investigators to, they would have probably found her, because it sounds like they did a lot of digging. It only took the jury 38 minutes to return with a guilty verdict. McMonagall was sentenced to die in California's gas chamber in San Quentin State Prison. But McMonagall wasn't finished, at least not yet according to him. While he was on death row, he confessed to the murder of a woman named Dorothy Rose Jones of San Francisco. I searched and I could not find any information about this victim. All of the obituaries that I found under that name, they all lived out long lives. Later, McMonagall claimed to have murdered a total of 11 people, though he was never charged with any of the murders. And again, I think this was just an attempt to try to get out of the jail, to take the investigators and the FBI on more wild goose chases, but they didn't bite. McMonagall did appeal his conviction, of course, based on the establishment of corpus delicti. In his appeal denial, the court said, "It is apparent from this review of the cases that the general trend of authority has been to hold that upon prima facie proof of corpus delicti, the extrajudicial statements, admissions, or confessions of the accused may be admitted into evidence, and having been so properly admitted, they mean, with the evidence from other sources, be considered by a jury in its determination whether or not all the elements of the crime and the connection therewithin of the accused have been established to a moral certainty and beyond all reasonable doubt. Where a confession is freely and voluntarily made, it is admissible as evidence in support of corpus delicti, as well as the criminal participation of the accused. Full proof of the corpus delicti independently of the confession of the accused is not required." So, in other words, you confessed, you had all this other evidence, buried clothing, the victim's school books, her socks on the cliff, blood in the seat of your vehicle. We're pretty sure you killed her, so yeah, we'd like to have the body, but we don't need it. And in an odd side note to this whole story, and I'm going to provide you with a little bit of a warning here, there are some instances of animal cruelty involved. There's some animal testing and experimentation, but the details, they're really not necessary, so I'm probably going to be able to just skip right over that. So in the 1930s, there was a biologist and a writer named Dr. Robert Cornish. He was described as a child prodigy, having graduated with honors from UC Berkeley in 1921 at the age of 18, earning his doctorate 4 years later at the age of 22. He had become involved in some research and various projects, but by 1932, Dr. Cornish became interested in the idea of bringing recently dead people back to life. His idea involved a seesaw type of contraption that the dead person would be placed on and would be teetering back and forth in order to get the blood flowing inside their bodies. The following year, he tried this technique on some heart attack victims, drowning victims, and electrocution victims, but he was never able to revive any of them. Feeling as though he needed a more controlled situation, he decided to start experimenting on dogs in 2 experiments over the course of a year. The dogs were named Lazarus 4 and Lazarus 5. We don't need to get to the details, but he brought the dogs into clinical death, one of them in 1934 and one of them in 1935. He then placed the dog on his seesaw. He circulated their blood while simultaneously injecting them with epinephrine and anticoagulants, and he was successful, being able to bring both of those dogs back to life. So naturally, he wanted to try this technique on a human being. And well, condemned inmate Thomas McMonigle heard about the doctor and his experiments, and he wanted to offer his body for the reanimation experiment. So in 1947, Dr. Cornish petitioned the California Department of Corrections to allow him to revive McMonigle after he was executed in the gas chamber. But the warden of the prison, Clinton Duffy, he was like, no. Request denied. And he explained that once they carried out an execution in the gas chamber, it takes at least 30 minutes for all of the toxic fumes to clear out of the chamber in order for it to be safe for others to enter. And furthermore, they usually err on the side of caution and leave the condemned in the gas chamber for about an hour before he is removed. Dr. Cornish was not deterred by this denial. He appealed the warden's decision, insisting he would be able to pull it off in that environment. And in order to prove it, he would replicate the gas chamber on his own. He would kill a sheep in that gas chamber using the exact chemicals that the state uses, which is potassium cyanide or sodium cyanide dropped into sulfuric acid, which creates the chemical reaction to generate the hydrogen cyanide. And then Dr. Cornish would revive the sheep and bring it back from the dead as proof of his concept. But the warden still didn't change his mind, and neither did the appellate courts. Now, there is the underlying reason why the state of California was against Cornish's experiments, and that has to do with the constitutional double jeopardy clause. If McMonigle was put to death, and he has technically served out his sentence, then if Cornish were to bring him back, would they be forced to set McMonigle free? Cornish said that he would not be freed since he did confess to a second murder, but some lawyers at the time did speak to the doctor and said if McMonigle is brought back to life, he would legally be free. I think we've had this debate in the Facebook group not too long ago about an inmate named Benjamin Schreiber. He was serving a life without parole sentence for a murder, and in 2015, Schreiber collapsed in his cell, and doctors managed to get his heart pumping again 5 times. So once he recovered, he filed a new appeal. He died, technically, so he has served out his sentence. Interesting thought, nice try, but it didn't work. An Iowa appeals court ruled that dying for a brief amount of time doesn't mean you get to get out of jail. Schreiber was ordered to remain in prison until a medical examiner declares him dead for good. One judge wrote, quote, Schreiber is either alive, in which case he must remain in prison, or he is dead, in which case this appeal is moot. And another judge noted that the fact that he was making these legal motions for release in and of itself confirms that the petitioner is currently living. And he really had no case law to base his claims on. So I don't think it's ever going to be a successful appeal, no matter how many times somebody tries this. On February 20th, 1948, Thomas McMonagle was executed in California's death chamber for the murder of Thora Chamberlain. He is the first person to receive a no-body conviction in California and the fourth ever in the United States. And I did find his age at the time of his death. He was 33 years old. And as for Thora's final resting place, that remains a mystery. And that brings this bonus episode of California Dreaming to a close. I would encourage you to come over to our Facebook discussion group if you haven't done so already and request to join. It is there we discuss cases that we cover. We share all of our thoughts and our opinions, not only about our shows, but other podcasts that we listen to, documentaries we've watched, and books that we've read, as well as news stories, current events, pictures of our pets, funny memes. Please feel free to come on over and share. You can also follow the show's Facebook page and like that page and leave a review or a recommendation. You can also follow us on Twitter at CaliforniaPod and Instagram at CaliforniaDreamingPod. I'm sorry my voice has been raspy. It's like I said in the group, it's been a rough couple of days, and I'll talk to you guys more about it a little bit later. Just really wanted to get this episode done for you guys, and I want to thank all of you for all of your nice messages. I am taking care of myself, even though I know I sound like crap right now. But I really wanted to finish this because I had started it earlier last week. And as for birthdays this week, I would like to wish Turkan a very happy birthday on the 11th. Ralph and Ginger, and I don't know which one is their birthday because they signed up, I think, on Instagram together, but one of them has a birthday on the 11th, so happy birthday to you as well. Scott K on the 12th, and Cynthia D also on the 12th. California Dreaming is brought to you by the Orbital Jigsaw Network, a podcast production company on a mission to create some of the best podcasts to listen to, with an eclectic roster of shows and content including true crime, history, sports, entertainment, gaming, and social media. So come over to our website, www.orbitaljigsaw.com. You can find links to all of our shows there, as well as California Dreaming's merchandise store on TeePublic. Again, that's www.orbitaljigsaw.com. Some of you were asking to hear from Fred again, but right now he is snoring away in the other room, behaving himself for once, so I'm not going to disturb him because I still have to edit this. But I want to thank you all again so much for listening. I'm your host, Roseanne. Until next time, sweet dreams.
Hello everyone. Let me tell you about the Apple for the Teacher podcast. I'm Anna Thomas, a teacher and your host. So you're probably thinking it's about reading, writing and arithmetic, right? Well, think again. It's a fresh take on true crime, where you wouldn't expect to find true crime. In schools. Yes, schools. You will hear tragic stories about murder, abduction, school bus hijack, student disappearance, suicide, kidnap and ransom, a school camp tragedy, the list goes on. So if you're looking for something a little different in the true crime genre, then Apple for the Teacher is for you. So join me as I present the bad apples. But until then, remember to be a good apple.